verses 1 through 7. Now it happened during the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign over Judah, the armies of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon marched against him and laid siege to Jerusalem, Judah's capital. The Lord gave Nebuchadnezzar the victory and allowed him to take over King Jehoiakim of Judah as his prisoner. At the same time, he permitted the Babylon king to rob God's temple of some of its sacred vessels and carry them away to Babylonia, called Shinar, which was the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, to fill the treasury of his own gods, Marduk and Nebo. After the king returned home, he commanded Ashpenaz, chief of the royal eunuchs, to bring some of the Israelites who had been taken captive of the palace. These included members of Judah's royal family and the nobility. He was looking for potential candidates from the exiles to serve in his court. Fit young men with no physical or moral infirmities, handsome, skilled in all wisdom, knowledgeable, discerning, and understanding. Those selected would be taught the language and literature of the Chaldeans, the people who lived in Babylonia. As part of their assimilation into the Babylonian court life, the king offered them a daily portion of food and wine from his own table. They were to be educated for 3 years before serving in the king's court. From among Judah's exiles, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were selected. Ashpenaz, chief of the royal eunuchs, gave them Babylonian names to signify their new identities in a foreign place. Daniel, he renamed Belteshazzar, Hananiah, Shadrach, Mishael, Meshach, and Azariah, Abednego.
Continuing on in verse 8. Although the king ate only the finest Babylonian fare, Daniel was determined not to violate God's law and defile himself by eating the food and drinking the wine that came from the king's table. So he asked the chief of the royal eunuchs for permission not to eat the food. Now, God had given Daniel special favor and fondness in the eyes of the king's chief eunuch. Still, the eunuch was concerned. Belteshazzar, your request puts me in a difficult position. I'm afraid of what my lord the king might do. He's ordered that you're to eat the food and drink the wine that was prepared for his table. What will happen if he sees you and your friends over time in poorer health than the other young men your own age? I'm certain he will have my head. When Ashpenaz refused, Daniel reasoned with the guard whom the chief of the royal eunuchs assigned to watch over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Daniel said to the guard, "Please, do us a favor. Put us, your servants, to the task for the next 10 days. Give us a vegetarian diet and water. When the time is up, you can see for yourself our condition and compare it to the condition of the other young men who are eating from the king's table. Then, after you've seen what has happened, do whatever you think is best with us, your servants." So, the guard agreed to do as Daniel requested. He tested them on a diet of only vegetables, grains, and water for 10 days. When the 10 days were up, he looked them over and noticed that Daniel and his friends were better off than all the young men eating from the king's best food. They looked healthy and well-nourished. So the guard continued to hold back their royal rations and replace them with a strictly vegetarian diet. Through all of this, God conferred upon these 4 young men superior abilities in literature, language, and wisdom. God had given Daniel an additional gift too, the ability to interpret visions and dreams. When the 3-year period of training and conditioning as set by the king was over, the king sent for the candidates. The chief of the royal eunuchs himself escorted them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king interviewed all of them and found that none of the candidates were any better than Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they were each assigned an important place in the king's court. When the king inquired further into their grasp of wisdom and understanding, he discovered that they were better prepared than all the magicians and enchanters in his empire, even 10 times better. This is how Daniel came to serve the royal court, a position that he safely held until the 1st year of King Cyrus, when his Persian army conquered Babylon. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
integrity is risky. Today we're going to be in 3 chapters of the Bible, so if you have a Bible, these are the 3 that we're going to be in. Daniel chapter 1, Daniel chapter 3, and Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 1, Daniel chapter 3, and Daniel chapter 6. I'm just glad I can count. Now, if you're following along in the story, which is kind of the guide that has directed this whole thing so far, the story being a book of the biblical narrative put together from beginning to end in order of time that these events occurred. If you're following along in that, we will be in chapter 18 of the story today. Now, to give you a little bit of context, last week we found out that this kingdom, this promised land, these people that God had been trying to lead for so many generations had cracked apart. They had all this corruption, all of these troubles, and they had fallen apart. And not only that, but now the separate pieces had been taken and enslaved by other conquering nations. We learned that the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes of Israel, were taken and enslaved by a group known as the Assyrians. Everybody say Assyria?
Assyria.
Yeah, the Assyrians were not very nice people, and the nation of Israel, those 10 tribes, dissipated into the nation of Assyria, and we really don't hear from them again. They don't try and reclaim their identity as God's people. Now, the lower kingdom, the southern kingdom, the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, they are conquered and enslaved by a group known as the Babylonians. Everybody say Babylon.
Babylon.
Yeah, and the Babylonians, again, are not very nice people, but they conquer and enslave these people. They tear them away from this promised land. They burn God's city, the city of Jerusalem, and they pull all these people away from home. And they bring them into their own land to work as slaves and lesser citizens. Now, some of those people didn't have to necessarily work as slaves. Now, we learned in the text that Tori and I just read that of those exiles, of some of those people that were pulled out of those lower kingdom tribes, 4 of them were chosen to enter this special program. 4 young men who were very handsome and strong and dashing, and they wore bright green ties. All of those 4 men were chosen to be in this special program, this Babylonian master's degree, so that they could learn the language and the literature and the ways of Babylon. Essentially what the king is doing, King Nebuchadnezzar, he chooses the best of the best of the best of this new group of people, and he says, I want to use them for our benefit. That's just smart leadership. And so he recruits these people, he schools them, so that they can learn, and then there will be a candidacy. He'll choose people for this position within his own court. Now, would you like a fun fact? I know you. Fun fact, right? It says that these 4 guys were chosen and they were taught the language and literature of Babylon. The language of Babylon was Aramaic. And from this point on, within the book of Daniel, it is written in Aramaic. Up to this point, it's been written in Hebrew. Everything in the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. But this particular section of Daniel, after it talks about them learning the language and literature of Babylon, is written in the language of Babylon. I know that doesn't change your opinion of Daniel one way or another, but I just find it interesting and I feel like I should share it. Now, moving forward, these 4 guys have a little bit of an issue, and I'm going to refer to them by their common names. It's really kind of goofy. Tori did an awesome job reading names this morning, but they have kind of strange names, right? Daniel is Daniel's Hebrew name, but once he gets to Babylon, he gets a new name, Belteshazzar. But because Belteshazzar is a mouthful, I'm just going to refer to him as Daniel. And the other 3 get new names, and those new names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And those 3 names are in songs and all sorts of things, and probably more familiar to us. So I'm going to refer to those 3 as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, these guys had a problem, and we're going to read about it in Daniel chapter 1, starting in verse 3, which says, Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. So these candidates, these young students who are in this new big program to be trained, they are given the best food and the best wine from the king's table. Now this is important because it's not just common stuff that you get at the grocery store. This is the king's choice food and wine. The best in the land. And that's what they're given. But, as you know, because you're all good Bible students and because we've been in the Old Testament for about 15 years now, that that was a joke. It hadn't really been 15 years. I heard it groan. You know that what you eat is very important to the Jews, right? You can't eat things that are dead. You can't eat things that still have blood in them. You can't eat things that have been cooked to certain gods. And so what they knew that what entered their body mattered, right? What they allowed into their body mattered. And so Daniel, he goes up to the chief official and he says, look, I recognize that you're the one in charge here. And he's very humble about this. He says, but this goes against everything that we believe. Why don't you let us eat just veggies and water? And I kind of feel like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I'm like, wait, what? What did he say? I like steak. Come on. But he says, no, listen. Let's do a little experiment. 10 days, we'll eat only a vegetarian diet, drink some water, and you can see how we look. If we look bad, then do with us whatever you want. But if we're looking good, then you know that God's up to something. Okay? So 10 days go by, they eat only veggies and grains and water, and then somehow, through a miracle of God, because I don't like vegetables, they look fantastic. They look amazing. Right? They look better, 10 times better, than the guys who've been eating the king's choice food. See, there's something about integrity that is risky. These guys knew what was right, what was wrong. They knew what the law said about what you eat. They knew that what you allowed into your body mattered, and they made a stand. And they said, look, we're not going to do this because God says it's not right. Not for us, not right now. Vegetables only. That's what we're going to eat. They could have been kicked out of the program. They could have been enslaved. They could have been killed. Integrity is risky. One of my favorite board games, I'm a big fan of board games. I like them. I played them all the time as a kid. One of my favorite board games of all time is Risk. Anybody like Risk? Yeah, Interchange does. Yeah, a few others. I love Risk because it involves a lot of strategy and it takes a lot of time. But if you've never played the game before, here's what works. You have a board that is basically a map of the world, a map of planet Earth. And each of the continents is divided into various territories. Now what you do is you have a set number of armies, and you place them on territories that you would like, and then you battle it out using dice and other things, and then there's a winner. You fight for global domination. Now, I won't tell you my strategy in case I end up playing any of you, but everybody has their own idea of how to make this work. Everybody has their idea of how to properly play this game, and everybody has their favorite territory. They have their special one that they like, they'll go to first, and they'll load it up with protection. See, there's that one territory that if you lose it, you know you've lost the whole thing. There might be some collateral nations, you know, those are just distractions, okay, but those are nice. But if I lose this connection, if I lose this route, if I lose this battle, then I've lost the whole game. And so the question for us is, what battles can you not afford to lose? What territories of your life, of your own inner character, can you not afford to lose? Can you not afford to compromise? Daniel chapter 3. These four guys are doing really well within the kingdom. As we read this morning, they were given all these gifts. They were smart. They were well-liked. They did well within the business and in leadership. And everything seems to be going really, really well for these four guys. Now, remember, in case you've forgotten, they are not in a Christian country. They're in a land where the leadership worships other gods and other deities and even themselves. They're not in a place where Yahweh God, the God that their ancestors have worshipped for for thousands of years, they're not in a place where that God is the leader. And so they're distinguishing themselves, doing things differently, and doing things well. Daniel chapter 3. There comes a time when the king decides that the people need to worship him better. And so here's what he does. King Nebuchadnezzar, he decides, you know what? We need a statue. A statue of me. Does anybody have a statue of themselves? Okay, that's probably a good thing. Nebuchadnezzar had a statue built that was 9 feet wide. Okay, that's pretty wide. And 90 feet tall, which is about twice as tall as the ceiling. It's huge. Huge golden statue of himself. You think he had an ego problem? Huge golden statue. And every time that there was music played, right, every time the band strikes up, everybody in the entire nation, no matter what they were doing, had to get on their knees, put their foreheads to the ground, and worship this statue, this image of the king, the one who considered himself to be a god. And so, first day, music plays. And everybody, and you can hear it, right? They all hit the ground, bowing towards this giant statue that you can see anywhere in town. Except for 3. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, have you ever, maybe this happens in church, everybody stands up and you didn't get the memo? Or, okay, it's time to sit down, and everybody sits down, and you happen to be looking at your bulletin or something, you look around, you're the only guy standing. Has anybody ever had that happen? Maybe it's just me. But thousands of people hit the ground, except for 3 guys. It's hard not to stand out that way. So, of course, this is against the law, and so these 3 guys are brought before the king. He said, boys, let's have a little chat about how things are done here in the kingdom. Daniel chapter 3, starting at verse 15. Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, anybody have zither music on their iPod? The zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. We're cool. See, once the music plays, maybe you just didn't hear it. When the music plays, you hit the ground, say a little prayer to my big golden statue, we'll be good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Now, this word immediately here doesn't seem to say that there's going to be a trial. It doesn't seem to imply that there's going to be some time in between, maybe we can discuss this little misunderstanding. It says immediately. Look, if everybody hits the ground, you guys are the only ones left standing, and you're not worshiping the big golden statue, you will be thrown into a blazing furnace. Now, I realize we might think it's a little strange to just have blazing furnaces laying around all the time. They would have these big walk-in furnaces that they would use to smelt their weapons. Essentially, they would use them to form their metal weaponry. These would be huge things, and they would get very, very hot. Archaeologists and historians, they guess that these things got somewhere around 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Let that sink in for just a second. 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. That's really hot. You guys remember what hot felt like, right? If you don't worship the big golden statue when the music plays, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Listen to what they said. Oh, then the king finishes. He says, "Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" He said, basically, you're going to be out of luck at that point. Here's what they say. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego reply to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter." The guts, the intestinal fortitude that it takes to stand before the king of a nation that has captured your nation. Okay, this isn't a friendly neighborhood king that we elected and he's vying for our votes. No. This is King Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonians. He is a mean guy who has taken your city, your nation captive. He's given you a job. He's giving you a break. And these guys say, listen, you're the king, right? But we don't need to defend ourselves before you. Really? They say if we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God that we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. Look, we don't need to defend ourselves because the God that we serve is willing and able to save us. Now, they're still nice about it, right? They're still cordial. King Nebuchadnezzar, your majesty. They're not being mean here. They're just saying, look, we're going to have integrity in this, and God's going to save us. Now, here's the key. This next thing that they say. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. Now, it's one thing when we have our battles, our struggles, right? To say God is strong, he's mighty to save, he's able to rescue us, and he's going to take care of us in all these things. Right? It's almost easy to say that because we have faith and we read all these stories about God's power and his might. It's another thing to say, even if he doesn't, even if things don't turn out the way that I think they will, we're still not going to give in. We're still not going to do what he wants to do because it's not the right thing to do. When I was a kid growing up, I had a cork board. Did anybody have a cork board growing up? They still have cork boards? Okay. I had a cork board in my room, and my parents gave me, somewhere along the line, I think I still have them, little paper, I don't know, sayings or slogans or whatever. And one of them, I remember very clearly, it was red with white font. It said, "What is popular is not always right, and what is right is not always popular." Imagine everybody else gets into something and you're the only one who stands up and says, "No, this isn't right. God doesn't honor this." We have trouble with that, right? Because most of us are afraid of confrontation. We want everybody to like us. We want everybody to invite us to stuff. We don't want to offend anybody. We don't want to be politically incorrect. John, Paul, George, and Ringo little band called the Beatles, reminded us way back when that we all live in a yellow submarine. The kids are going, I have no idea what you're talking about. We all live in a yellow submarine. Now, picture in your mind a yellow submarine. Okay? Yellow submarine underwater. If you need to close your eyes, that's fine as long as you don't snore. A yellow submarine, right? Now, could the yellow submarine be green? Yes, no? Could it be green? Did somebody paint the submarine green? Could the submarine be red? Yeah. What about polka dot? Could it be a polka dot submarine? Sure. Is that going to affect the operation of the sub? Not really. A submarine's whole job, right, is to hide beneath the water in naval warfare. That's its purpose. It's a boat that's able to be completely submerged underwater. So if somebody said, look, we've been riding in this yellow submarine, I hate the color yellow, let's make it pink. All right, we can paint it pink. Not a big deal, it's just a preference thing. We can compromise our preferences. But let's just imagine, right? The Navy is in this submarine, cruising along underwater, hiding from the enemy. And somebody says, man, I'm getting kind of claustrophobic. I like the wind through my hair. I need some fresh air. Take a look. I think that we should open the hatch. Okay. Well, you know what's going to happen if we open the hatch? What's going to happen? Water comes in. And if water comes into a boat that's underwater, it sinks. And some people think, wait. There's a way around this, right? We can compromise here. Bill wants the hatch open. He needs some fresh air. That's fine. Tell you what, we'll go up to the surface, we'll pop the hatch, and then everybody will be okay. You know what they call a submarine at the surface with its hatch up? A sitting duck. See, there are some things, some truths that just shouldn't be compromised. Integrity is risky. And integrity is tested. There will come a time when your integrity will be tested. When the things that you say are important will be put to the test. You'll have an opportunity to say, well, you know what, it's important, but I'll let it slide this time. I'll give in this time. Just once. Integrity is tested. Everybody still with me?
Yes.
Now, as you know, guys get thrown into the fiery furnace. Very bold, very brave. The soldiers who threw them in are burned and die. That's how hot this thing is. As soon as they get in there, the king looks in and says, wait a minute. Looks like there are 4 guys in there, and one looks like a son of the gods. Oops. Bring them back out. They come walking out. They don't even smell like smoke. That's incredible. Now, if you look at that story, it's an awesome story of integrity and standing up for what you believe in, literally standing up for what you believe in. But if you do the math, you go, wait a minute. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, we were talking about 4 guys. What happened to Daniel? Well, honestly, at that point in history, I don't know what happened to Daniel. Don't know where he was at. Don't know if he was in the bathroom. He didn't hear. I don't know. But Daniel doesn't get away with not being tested, right? Because every believer, everybody who says that God is the one true God, their integrity will be tested. And Daniel's integrity is tested furthermore in chapter 6. Again, Bible, Daniel chapter 6. Daniel is a high-ranking official. I just want to read this for you. Daniel's a high-ranking official. Daniel chapter 6, starting in verse 3. Now, Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators, satraps, by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the entire kingdom. Isn't that incredible? A Christian, right, a God follower, so distinguished himself in his job site that everybody around him looked at his exceptional qualities and his boss planned to put him in charge of everything. At this, the administrators and satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. He's too good. He is excellent in what he does. He is excellent in character. He is trustworthy. He's not corrupted by other governments or taking bribes or none of that. He's not negligent. He's not doing dumb stuff at work. Right? He is the best worker, the best leader, the best administrator that he can possibly be. He is standing out at work. Finally, these men who were trying to trap him say, we'll never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. They knew. They knew exactly the territory that Daniel wouldn't give up. They knew the place that Daniel was never going to compromise. He said, look, I'm going to live in this land. I'm going to get along peacefully. Imagine that, Christians getting along peacefully in a secular land. He said, I'm going to get along peacefully. I'm going to do the best job that I can because God commands it. I'm going to be incorruptible and not negligent. And the only thing that I can be defensive on is the law of my God. So, Daniel is serving in this land. These four guys, these administrators and satraps, they come to the king, the new king of Persia. Persia, a new nation that takes over Babylon. And they come to the king and say, look, king, we need you to make this law that says anybody who's caught worshiping another god gets thrown into a den of lions. Okay, whatever. Signs it. Then, it says, if you read the text further down in chapter 6, it says that these guys went to Daniel's house and saw him praying. They knew he wasn't going to back down. Daniel didn't make a scene. He didn't put up a protest. He didn't sit outside the royal palace with a sign that says, I'm not going to do this. This is wrong. He went back home, continued to pray to his God as he always had. And then these guys came to his house and saw him praying. Said, look, he's doing the wrong thing. Threw him in the lion's den. The lions said, yeah, we don't want to. Well, they didn't really say anything, but God rescues Daniel from the lions. They don't eat him. The king comes back the next morning, says, Daniel, what's going on? He says, oh, nothing, we're just cuddling. Daniel hops out, says, how's it going? And these guys who tried to trap him are then thrown into the lion's den. See, there's something about Daniel distinguishing himself that even though his beliefs disagreed with others, they knew they could trust him. They knew there was something different about Daniel. And every time, if you read through the book of Daniel, and I encourage you to do so, when you read through the book of Daniel, every time there's trouble, every time there's confusion, every time there's a major question, and nobody else can answer it, who do the people run to? Daniel. So, 4 questions, 2 stories, then we'll be done. 4 questions, 2 stories, then we'll be done. I not saying never compromise. That's not what I'm saying. Because I recognize there are times when you need to make peace with somebody that you need to just ease off a little bit, right? Sometimes compromise is necessary for peace. The Apostle Paul later would say, as far as it depends on you, be at peace with everyone. And that's the part we like to quote, right? The second half of that sentence says, and continue to be holy. Be at peace with everyone. Treat people cordially. As you noticed in all three of these examples, they still treated the people who were in authority over them, they still treated them with respect. But there are some battles that you can't afford to lose. Compromise preference is not true. So 4 questions that you can ask yourself to figure out if you're compromising something that should be incompromisable. 4 questions. Here you go. Question number 1, what am I really giving up? Some of us hold so tightly to everything and don't compromise at all. What are you really giving up here? Who cares if we paint the submarine purple? Doesn't affect anything. It's still underwater. Sub's still going to do its thing. What am I really gaining here? The beauty of a compromise is that both sides get something out of it. So make sure that you're not just sacrificing things. What am I really gaining out of this? 3rd question. Does this bring us closer to Jesus? This is probably the most important question of the 4. Does this bring us closer to Jesus? And notice that the question is not, does this bring me closer to Jesus? But does this bring us closer to Jesus? Does this help both sides get closer to the King of Kings? Or is this pushing us away from Him in some form or fashion? And last but not least, is this worth dying for? Is this battle, this territory that you are so defensive on, is this worth dying over? See, Jesus felt like we were worth dying for. Remember, He was given all sorts of opportunities to compromise. Out in the desert, His first couple days of ministry, Satan tempts Him. Dude, do your thing. Turn rocks into bread. Fly off this temple. Just raise your hand, bow to me, say, whatever, and I'll give you all this stuff. Just give in. Give up this one little territory. It's not that important. He says, no. That's the most important thing. Integrity is risky. 2 stories, and then I'll be done. Story number 1. Many years ago, Al Capone virtually owned Chicago. Capone wasn't famous for anything heroic. He was notorious for enmeshing the Windy City in everything from bootlegged booze and prostitution to murder. Capone had a lawyer nicknamed Easy Eddie. He was his lawyer for a good reason. Eddie was very good. In fact, Eddie's skill at legal maneuvering kept Big Al out of jail for a long time. To show his appreciation, Capone paid him very well. Not only was the money big, but also Eddie got special dividends. For instance, he and his family occupied a fenced-in mansion with live-in help and all the conveniences of the day. The estate was so large that it filled an entire Chicago city block. Eddie lived the high life of the Chicago mob and gave little consideration to the atrocity that went on around him. Eddie did have one soft spot, however. He had a son that he loved dearly. Eddie saw to it that his young son had clothes, cars, and a good education. Nothing was withheld. Price was no object. And despite his involvement with organized crime, Eddie even tried to teach him right from wrong. Eddie wanted his son to be a better man than he was. Yet with all his wealth and influence, there were 2 things that he couldn't give his son. He couldn't pass on a good name or a good example. One day, Easy Eddie reached a difficult decision.
Easy wanted to rectify wrongs that he had done. He decided he would go to the authorities and offer his son some semblance of integrity. To do this, he would have to testify against the mob, and he knew that the cost would be great. So he testified. Within the year, Easy Eddie's life ended in a blaze of gunfire on a lonely Chicago street. But in his eyes, he had given his son the greatest gift that he had to offer, at the greatest price that he could pay. Integrity is risky. Story number 2. World War II produced many heroes. One such man was Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. He was a fighter pilot assigned to the aircraft carrier Lexington in the South Pacific. One day, his entire squadron was sent on a mission. After he was airborne, he looked at his fuel gauge and realized that someone had forgotten to top off his tank. He would not have enough fuel to complete his mission and get back to his ship. His flight leader told him to return to the carrier. Reluctantly, he dropped out of formation, headed back to the fleet. As he was returning to the mothership, he saw something that turned his blood cold. A squadron of Japanese aircraft were speeding their way toward the American fleet. The American fighters were gone on a mission, and the fleet was all but defenseless. He couldn't reach his squadron and bring them back in time to save the fleet, nor could he warn the fleet of the approaching danger. There was only one thing to do. He must somehow divert them from the fleet. Laying aside all thoughts of personal safety, he dove into the formation of Japanese planes. Wing-mounted .50 calibers blazed as he charged in, attacking one surprised enemy plane and then another. Butch wove in and out of the now broken formation and fired at as many planes as possible until all his ammunition was finally spent. Undaunted, he continued the assault. He dove at the planes, trying to clip a wing or a tail in hopes of damaging as many enemy planes as possible and rendering them unfit to fly. Finally, the exasperated Japanese squadron took off in another direction. Deeply relieved, Butch O'Hare and his tattered fighter limped back to the carrier. Upon arrival, he reported in and related the event surrounding his return. The film from the gun camera mounted on his plane told the tale. It showed the extent of Butch's daring attempt to protect his fleet. He had, in fact, destroyed 5 enemy aircraft. This took place on February 20th, 1942, and for that action, Butch became the Navy's first ace of World War II and the first naval aviator to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. A year later, Butch was killed in aerial combat at the age of 29. His hometown would not allow the memory of this World War II hero to fade, and today, O'Hare Airport in Chicago is named in tribute to the courage of this great man. So the next time that you find yourself at O'Hare International, give some thought to visiting Butch's memorial, displaying his statue and his Medal of Honor. It's located on the west end by Terminal 2. So, what do these two stories have to do with each other? Well, Butch O'Hare was Easy Eddie's son. Integrity is risky. It's not nearly as dangerous as giving in. So, my challenge for you today is to stand firm on the things that should never be compromised. God's truth. Stand up when everybody else is bowing down to a false god. And stand out. Distinguish yourself with excellence. No matter what job you do, no matter what school you go to, no matter where you find yourself in life, stand out because God asks it. Integrity is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as compromise. Let's pray. God, we thank you for giving us examples like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, young men who were in a difficult situation, enslaved by a foreign nation, in a strange land with strange people, and yet they never gave up honoring you with their lives, with their actions. They knew what was important to you, and therefore it was important to them. And they were going to do whatever it took to defend that, risking their very lives. God, I pray that we would live out our faith with such boldness. That when people say, just give in, just one time, it's no big deal, everybody else is doing it, that we would say, no, this doesn't honor God. I will stand up for Him. I will stand firm for Him. And I will stand out, distinguishing myself, showing that I am trustworthy and incorruptible. Father, give us that strength, that enthusiasm, that passion and zeal for you. And it's in your Son's name that we pray.